Another needlessly chaotic state budget process is over, with the majority party taking us to the brink of busting the constitutional deadline for the 7th consecutive year, and then throwing a curveball at us in the final moments this afternoon by not passing HB 19. Passing the state budget is the only duty the legislature is constitutionally required to complete each year. With $50 billion in taxpayer money at stake, you'd think the majority party would treat the process with more care and planning instead of acting like a frazzled college student who, after procrastinating all semester, pulls an all-nighter to finish a paper. But the haphazard process aside, House Democrats are pleased the final budget includes 2 of our top 3 priorities: funding local K-12 schools at the full amount required by state law, and securing $107 million the governor requested for child care providers. Although we fell short of achieving our 3rd budget priority of preventing direct taxpayer funding of private schools, we are confident the courts will strike down this appropriation as a clear violation of the state's ban against direct public funding of private individuals or organizations. In addition to our major priorities, House Democrats successfully added a number of budget provisions securing important funding for their home districts. We appreciate the budget chairmen in both chambers for their willingness to work with Democrats on these and other funding issues. And with the budget done, an intense final week of session lies ahead. Fortunately, several Democratic priorities, like ending child marriage, eliminating taxes on period products and diapers, expanding the circuit breaker tax credit for seniors, and stopping the state from confiscating the federal benefits from foster kids, to name a few. They've already been sent to the governor, and we're very grateful for that. Unfortunately, there's plenty of bad legislation that must be stopped, with Republican efforts to overturn voters on reproductive rights and paid sick leave topping the list. I'm more than happy to take questions, and so is our ranking member on budget, Betsy Fogel.
I mean, yeah. So if the budget's not done, then with House Bill 19, what happens next?
My understanding is HB 19 is dead. That's my understanding, but I'm more than happy to give it over to Betsy.
Yeah, hey everybody, Betsy Fogel, Springfield. You're catching me after quite a surprise was dropped in my lap. I had no idea walking into the room today that there was any question about this body passing House Bill 19, something that we have all worked so diligently to support and to get investments in. So coming off of that fresh news, the chairman pulled me after the motion was not made to bring up 19 and just let me know that he was uncomfortable with the spending amount. He had a number in his head that he wanted the overall budget to stick to, and the totality of House Bill 19 would have put us over that number, and it's not his intention, clearly, today, to fund the investments made in House Bill 19.
Can you elaborate on what investments are in that bill?
Absolutely. There are about $500 million worth of investments, notably roads and bridges in rural Missouri, a lot of hospital funding for rural Missouri, a foster care building in Bates County, things like investments in the arts and entertainment, in projects from every corner across the state, and I'm disappointed that we're not getting that done.
So the governor usually makes the decisions about what spending items are going to go through, and you all have September to decide whether he's made the decisions you agree with. How can, what is your reaction? Is there anything you can do in response to a couple of members of the chamber deciding that they're not going to allow spending to go through?
We could, of course, bring up some of these items, if not all of them, in a supplemental. I did not get the impression from the chair that there's any appetite to fund any of the investments in House Bill 19 currently, and it sounded like he shared that was the will of the caucus. The majority party caucused earlier this week to talk about some of the budget frustrations that they felt as it relates to my senator and the Senate side of the building. I think they felt disrespected and that their voice wasn't heard throughout the process, and I think what you saw today was a culmination of that frustration.
So going through the budget conference items, the Senate prevailed on almost 370, the House about 180, mainly on all of those. Vast majority was which one was spending more. Shouldn't these concerns have been raised during conference if it was going too far on the spending side?
I would have liked for that to happen. If you will remember, and now that I'm thinking through it, the chair, when we made the decision to fully fund the foundation formula in House Bill 2, made a comment about how because we made that decision and we went the Senate position in fully funding the foundation formula, that he expected there to be different budget decisions later on in the process, and I'm wondering if that was his signal that we were not going to fund House Bill 19.
So it sounds like maybe
an ego problem, or, I mean, like, there
Yes.
there was some ego involved. It's just what I'm assuming here, but who's impacted by the decision not to fund 19?
I mean, our constituents back home, the 6 million people who call this state home and are proud to do so. Again, these are projects, expansion of a dental school in Kansas City, a convention center right here in Jefferson City, something that the committee spent hours discussing in budget hearings. Again, I go back to the roads and bridges and the hospital funding that, doesn't impact Springfield as a third largest city in the state, but those smaller communities. I can't imagine that a lot of the majority party is walking out of the building today feeling proud that they just gutted their own projects. And I'm sure that was a difficult position for them to be in, but they should have said something.
The House also passed 18, 19, and 20 later than the initial group of budget bills, which gave the Senate less time to look at them before this week. I mean, is there a timing issue? Does the House need to get stuff over earlier? I guess that's how the process went.
Yeah, that is the $50 billion question of how do we make this budget process better? How do we pass a budget where we're not bumping up against a constitutional deadline? How do we pass a budget where appropriations staff isn't expected to sleep in their offices and not get any rest? My 5 years up here, this is what happens. We've been in this position nearly every year since I've been a part of the team, and hoping in years forward we can fix that. But I show up in a hearing room when I'm asked to show up, and that's all I can do.
It's
Was
been
the
30
tax
se-
credit or tax cut package, 591 or whatever it was, did that impact the delay whatsoever?
I can't speak to that.
In the 37 years since the budget deadline was set a week before the end of the session, there has only been one time when budget bills did not get finished, and that was on an intractable philosophical question that related to abortion in 1997. There has never been a year when a decision has been made to not pass a budget bill poised for passage. Once again, how do you deal with leadership that in the other party that just makes arbitrary decisions like that?
It would have been nice for someone on the other side of the aisle to read me in that this was a consideration. Clearly, the caucus had an in-depth discussion about it earlier in the week. For myself and my budget team members, who again spend hundreds of hours trying to craft a fiscally responsible budget, had I known that the entirety of House Bill 19 was going to be killed publicly on the floor with no warning, I would have handled myself different in committee, and I would have tried to fund items in different House bills. I like to make history, but this isn't the kind of history I'm proud to make.
Do you think that this frees up money for the stadium in Jackson County? Or, I'm sorry, Clayton.
I got the impression that there is, I don't know.
Are you
I don't know.
anticipating Governor Kehoe then to call a special session related to items in House Bill 19?
I couldn't speak to that.
What would you like to see happen? Like, would you want it to happen in a supplemental? Do you want a special? Like, what's the best way to restore this funding?
I don't care how it gets done. My members and I worked very hard to fund vital services to Missourians in House Bill 19, and I would like to deliver the promise and the effort that we made. And I know a lot of the majority party feels the same way. Looking through this list, there were members that worked very hard to bring dollars back home to their communities. I'm sure they're sitting in caucus feeling frustrated. But again, I would say you should have said something.
When we talk about, go ahead. When we talk about the empowerment scholarships, I mean, $50 million in the grand scheme of the budget isn't that much. But what kind of precedent does that set moving forward where money hasn't been dedicated in a budget like that before?
I spoke about this in my remarks on the floor. In my 5 years here, we have taken significant steps to privatize education. Again, one of the things that makes this country the greatest in the world is that every child has access to a free and quality public education, regardless of where they live, what they look like, how much money they make, or their ability. I know that $50 million in a $50 billion budget might not seem like enough, but I'm not comfortable spending $1 going to a school that wouldn't educate all children, and $50 million is too high. My fear is that we're going to continue down this path. The groups that want to privatize education will not stop until it's completely done.
I'm kicking myself because I didn't see the $1 million increase in the personal service line in the governor's budget that was not accompanied by any increase in the staffing of the governor's office. What have you been told about what that $1 million will be used for? It works out to about $27,000 per staffer.
I have not been told anything.
So you talked about not having voices heard, or that's what maybe the budget chair had said. It didn't feel like maybe some folks on the committee or committees didn't have their voices heard throughout this process. Can you just kind of explain, because what I see on the public side is maybe there's some pre-negotiating, and then by the time it gets to the conference committee, things have been pre-negotiated, so you all don't have as much of a voice. So can you just talk about that some, if you want to see anything change in that process?
Absolutely. I will say, actually, one of the things I enjoyed this year as a member of the House Minority Party is in that conference room, I felt like my voice was important. When we looked at the votes on things like fully funding the foundation formula, I got to be number 6 on a very important line item to House Democrats. When we were looking at the child care subsidy funding, I got to be vote 6 on something that was very important to House Democrats. So I like the public engagement. I think that House Republicans, I think they will say that maybe if when they join you, felt slighted in the process. There's that sentiment every year that the Senate steamrolls the House through the appropriations process, and I think that sentiment existed this year. When we think back to how this week flowed, you know, there were moments that I was called into a budget room by one chair and the other chair wasn't there in the room. And then moments I was called to be in a budget room by the other chair and the other chair wasn't there. So to me, that signaled that maybe the two of them weren't communicating as effectively as they could. And I think some of that lack of communication between the chairs in both sides of the building led to a very public, a very public death of House Bill 19.
Are the differences between how the House and Senate, you know, how they operate, isn't this self-inflicted because the House adheres to the balancing rule while the Senate does not?
I think you can make an argument that when you're a part of the chamber that makes significant cuts to the governor's recommendation and then the budget goes over to the other side and that side chooses to make more investments, that's probably plays into the dynamics of why the Senate is more successful throughout the process. I think that's right.
This session as a whole between the chambers, I feel like there's been more of a getting along sense than prior years. Has that ended today, do you think, with this very public death of a Senate bill that was not expected?
You guys heard my remarks in my appreciation to the chair. That doesn't change for me. I would like to have been clued in. I would have made different decisions had I known that it was a consideration to completely gut House Bill 19.
Between the House and the Senate, as far as the disconnect.
Well, lucky for them, we only have 1 week left, so if they're not speaking, we just have to get through 5 more days. So,
Are you expecting any sort of like, there are a lot of Republican priority bills that are over in the Senate. Are you expecting any kind of like retaliatory response?
above my pay grade, Kason.
President Ani, what did today's events have any impact on the level of trust you have with the leadership on the Republican side?
Yes, I would say so, yes. I think that, you know, what Representative Fogel was mentioning just about having not been clued in that this was on the table for the majority party is a huge, I think, breach of trust between the caucuses. I think that something so major, again, the majority party had dollars in HB 19 as well. This is a bipartisan effort to fund critical programs and capital improvements in our communities. And so, yeah, I do think that some trust has been lost, and I'm disappointed in it.
Representative Ani, you mentioned earlier about challenging this empowerment scholarship money in court. Is there a plan to do this yet, as your party has found this to be unconstitutional?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of an explicit plan to challenge it. I certainly encourage anyone who's listening to consider challenging this in court.
What would the challenge be? What would you argue?
Well, Article 3, Section 38A prevents direct public funding of private individuals and organizations. And so my understanding is that because this is unprecedented, that it will likely be challenged in court because to the point earlier, this does set a precedent for the state, and it is a very concerning one for those of us who don't want to fund private institutions that are allowed to discriminate against students.
So there's no pass-through organization first, or
There are, I believe. I'm not sure. I think that it's open to some interpretation, which is why it will likely go to the courts.
What are you anticipating the last week of session to entail as far as priorities goes? What have you heard?
I mean, if you had asked me 30 minutes ago, I probably would have had a much clearer idea, but I think that nothing would surprise me more than seeing an even greater battle emerge between the chambers in the last few days of session over this particular situation. I can't predict what the Senate's going to do, other than I know that their priorities are to overturn abortion access and Proposition A. So I think that while they will continue trying to achieve those goals, I'm certainly curious how this new situation will play out.
So the Chiefs are supposed to make a decision in June, which is only a couple weeks away, and I'm just curious because I've had some people like ask me who are worried about the Chiefs leaving. How do you feel at this point? Are you feeling like, all right, it's a win, or are you worried? And who's to blame if they leave?
Well, I'm not going to speak for the entire caucus. I will speak as a Kansas Citian, though. I'm not sure, honestly. I have not been brought into those conversations. I don't know what the feeling is. I have heard from folks on the Kansas side of the state line that their star bonds aren't backed by much, and that's likely not going to do a whole lot to bring a team across the state line. That said, I think that we are likely in a place where it's hard to place blame on whose fault it is. I think that there's been an enormous disconnect between the governor's office, elected state officials, local, county, and city officials. And I think that when the dust settles, we'll likely be able to put a little bit of blame on everyone in this process.
Just building on what Jack asked, like, is there any indication that what happened today is tied at all to stadium projects or any other big?
Not that I'm aware of, but again, as it has been made very clear, we are read in on very little.
And you haven't heard like of anywhere else besides Kansas like trying to recruit the Chiefs whatsoever?
I have not. No. All right. Thanks so much, all.